Hello, and welcome to the revival of a little project that I did for the first time 2 years ago in 2024 when I read two books that were turning 100 years old in 2024 that were published for the first time in 1924. And it turned out to be quite a successful project because while I DNF'd the first of the books, which was The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, the second book became one of my favorite books of the year, and that was A Passage to India by E.M. Forster. I was initially going to make this a vlog in 2024, but then I only found these two books and that didn't seem enough material for a vlog. So I thought I'd try again this year and try to find more books. Unfortunately, the year 1926 wasn't exactly the most successful publishing year in my eyes. So most of the books that were published for the first time in 1926 are either of no interest whatsoever to me, or I've actually read two books from the list that I found on Wikipedia, and those two books I didn't exactly like a lot. The first is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, and the second is Blood in the Mist by Hope Mirrlees, which I actually DNF'd. This is one of those classic fantasy stories from the first half of the 20th century. And there are a lot of books on that list that I either haven't heard of or, like I said, I don't have the least interest in. So there is Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner, Clouds of Witness by Dorothy L. Sayers. I've read Murder Must Advertise by her. I think it was Murder Must Advertise that I've read, and didn't particularly like it. I'm not sure I even finished it. Traumnovelle by Arthur Schnitzler. I don't think so. It's a German classic. There's Winnie the Pooh by Eamon, but I'm not going to read this for this project. There is The World of William Clissold by H.G. Wells, which I've never heard of. But in the end, I found two that I'm actually interested in. And one of them I actually already had a copy of, which is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. This is the first Hercule Poirot novel, if I'm not mistaken. And it's one that's generally well liked, I think. So this is a lucky coincidence. And the other one that I'm interested in, and I went and bought a copy, is Mary by Vladimir Nabokov, which is his first novel, originally written in Russian, and it's not one that he later in life translated into English himself, but it was translated under his, supervision or guidance, or he acted as advisor to the translator. And that's probably a good thing because, in a certain way, it is a good thing because if he had translated it later in life, chances are he would have reworked it substantially, and we wouldn't have, or the non-Russian speaking reader wouldn't have any access to this novel the way it was originally conceived and carried out, or to a version that is pretty close to the original at least. So this is Mary or Mashenka. Mashenka is the one that was published in 1926. Mary, so the English translation happened sometime later in Nabokov's life. I don't know exactly when. So these were the two books from the 1926 list that caught my attention. So that was, again, not enough material for a vlog. So I decided to go further back in time and looked at the list from 1826 to see which books were turning 200 years this year. And I found one from a romantic German poet and novelist, which I've always liked to read, but I've never read this novella by him. It is Aus dem Leben eines Taugenichts, Memoirs of a Good for Nothing. I think it's called in English, by Joseph von Eichendorff. This is a classic romantic novella about self-actualization, about a young man who sets out literally to find himself and self-actualize and live an authentic, free life. I'm very curious to see how this plays out, and with Joseph von Eichendorff you can always be sure that you're going to get some lovely atmospheric description of nature and the surroundings in general. However, this was the only interesting book from the list from 1826, so I ended up having to go even farther back in time to 1726, and lo and behold, one of the books that turns 300 years this year is Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. I've been going back and forth on whether or not I want to read this book, and finding it on this list decided it, so I went out and bought a copy. This is probably the book that I'm going to pick up last, though. I think I'm going to work my way back in time, starting with either The Murder of Roger Ackroyd or Mary/Mashenka. Perhaps I'll start them both today, because they are so very different, I expect. This one seems to be more like a book that I want to read in the afternoon, and this one's one that I'll be able to read late into the night until I fall asleep. So I'm going to report back in a little while once I've either finished one of the books or read a substantial amount of both. So it's now 2 days later, it's Monday the 16th, and I've read less than I wanted to. I've been feeling a bit under the weather lately, spent most of yesterday, Sunday, asleep in bed. But I have started both books. I read the first chapter of Mary, and I have to say, it doesn't feel like Nabokov. The language doesn't feel like Nabokov. That could be due to either the translation or the early date of the work. Perhaps Nabokov just hadn't really developed his voice at that early date. My feeling tells me that it is due to the translation, though. I hope that at least the plot and the characters will turn out to feel like the real deal. I've also read quite a bit of The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, 53 pages, and so far the murder of Roger Ackroyd hasn't yet happened. Roger Ackroyd is very much still alive, although he is worried and about some undisclosed issue, and I think the murder is about to happen. And I think it's going to be a locked room mystery, but really the overall setting already feels like a locked room too. It's a small village with a very tight-knit community and just one or two outsiders. It's very reminiscent of The Murder at the Vicarage, which is the first Miss Marple book. By the way, this isn't actually the first Poirot mystery. The first Poirot is, in fact, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, but it's reminiscent of the first Miss Marple book. In Murder at the Vicarage, A Murder at the Vicarage is told from the vicar's point of view, if I'm not mistaken, and this one is told from the point of view of the village's doctor, the country doctor. It's a very fun setup with all the secrecy and the intrigue and the gossip that are involved. However, I'm an idiot. I meant to read most of this, if not all of it, last weekend. That didn't happen, and now I will have to put it aside for a minute because today is the release date of a very highly anticipated new book for me. It's Gregory Ashe's new book. It's called The Same Bones, and it is the first book in a new series, the sequel series to The Lamb and the Lion. Gregory Ashe writes gay mysteries of different kinds. They are often quite gritty and extremely realistic as far as the struggles of the characters go. The characters of The Lamb and the Lion are probably my favorite couple of his, and I've been so excited about this new sequel series, so I will put everything else aside for the moment and concentrate on that book. Both the original series or the first series and the sequel series are set in Utah on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. One of the characters is a wildlife veterinarian, and this setting and this landscape is so beautiful, and it is no doubt going to exacerbate the very serious case of wanderlust that I have while I'm being kind of almost literally frozen in place by the snow and the bad weather that we've had, that we've been having and are still having here in Munich and in Bavaria. So that's it for now. I will report back once I have something new to tell you about our birthday books. Hello, it's now the end of February. Little time jump here because I was sick with the flu. You can probably still hear it in my voice. But that meant that I had a lot of time to read, and I finished The Same Bones by Gregory Ashe in no time, and then finished off The Murder of Roger Ackroyd right afterwards. So this turned out to be not a locked room mystery in the classic sense of the word after all, but it might as well have been because there's only a very small number of people who could have been the murderer. It's only a handful of the staff of Roger Ackroyd, his family, and close friends who were staying at his house at the time of the murder. And of course, each and every one of those people is keeping a secret and might be the murderer. I enjoyed this immensely. I think it is currently ranking at rank 3 of my favorite Agatha Christie mysteries. Below And Then There Were None and Murder on the Orient Express, but above Murder at the Vicarage. Although it is quite similar in setup, in the setting and everything, in the character, the cast of characters, it is quite similar to Murder at the Vicarage. And in fact, I read somewhere that one of the characters in here might have been Agatha Christie's own auto-inspiration for the character of Miss Marple. As it happens, this is also one of 2 Agatha Christie mysteries out of the 11, I think, that I've read so far, to which I guessed the solution. The person who turns out to have been the murderer was actually one of my favorite suspects from the very beginning. And then the further we got into it, the more time passed, and I was growing more and more sure that they must in fact have been the murderer. The only other Agatha Christie mystery to which I guessed the solution was, perhaps surprisingly, Murder on the Orient Express. And although the solution to this one is nothing like the solution to Murder on the Orient Express, I read them both recently, this one obviously, but Murder on the Orient Express, it can't have been more than 2 years that I read that one. And I think I wouldn't have been able to guess the solutions to either of these, let's say 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I read my favorite Agatha Christie mystery, and then there were none, when I was 15 and didn't have a clue about what was going on. And I wonder if I read it now, would I be able, if I read it now for the first time, would I be able to guess the solution, to guess the murderer? So it's so interesting to see yourself grow in this manner and be able to look back and say with almost 100% certainty, wow, I'm quite sure that I wouldn't have been able to guess the solution 20 years ago, because myself from 20 years ago didn't pay attention to certain things or wasn't attuned to certain things back then. Certain things just wouldn't have occurred to her. I'm not saying that this is a mystery for grown-ups, but it doesn't hurt to have a little more experience. But I'm not telling you of what kind. After that, I was also able to squeeze in Memoirs of a Good for Nothing, which I read pretty quickly because I didn't really enjoy it from the get-go. So this is kind of an anti-Bildungsroman, where the main character just goes off into the world with the intention of doing nothing and just letting life carry him along. And of course, everything turns out for the best, and he's living a life that's true to himself. It is about man being and remaining in his natural state with no personal development and betterment necessary, because the natural state is already the best, most noble state you could be in. It's life as it should be, yada, yada, yada. And I guess this idea had its time and place, would still have its time and place, in fact. But I rarely find anything of value in texts that explain this idea or any other idea, in fact, in such a simplistic and really pretty artless manner as this one does. Mostly because, well, it's so unrealistic that I find nothing enlightening or applicable to my own life in texts like this. And also, well, in the best case scenario, in the worst case, and this one was one of the worst cases, the protagonist is also living a pretty parasitic life, because he's only able to sustain this life of a good for nothing because other people provide for him and other people look out for him in the end, and in the end he has a safe haven to return to. So in the end it's just a guy going on a holiday. What is there for me to take from that? So in the end, this is a very eloquent, if not surprising, document from Romantic era German literature. But it's nothing that I can take anything of value from today. I am still reading Mary. I'm almost finished with it though, and I think I'm going to finish it today, tonight. I'm not really enjoying this. It's, for one, it doesn't read like Nabokov to me. I think a lot of that is to do with the translation. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a bad translation. I just think, I guess it's quite difficult to translate Russian to English or German for that matter, and to retain the lyrical quality of the language. But another thing is, well, I haven't read that many of Nabokov's novels, and those that I have read were or are for the most part of his later work. So I've read Hail Fire, Mean, Despair, which is an early Russian text in the original, but was later translated and also rewritten by the later Nabokov. And I've read Transparent Things. And of the four, the one which Mary resembles most is Transparent Things, which is not a good thing, as far as I'm concerned. I just think I'm a fan of the bitingly sarcastic and jaded later Nabokov, and this one seems pretty weightless by comparison and not in a good way. When this was first published in 1926, it probably felt like a breath of fresh air. So what is this even about? It's about essentially the main character and a small cast of other characters living in a Russian boarding house in Berlin. And they are all a bit quirky, a bit quaint, the protagonist being the most ordinary of them all, I would say. And one of the boarders, the most unpleasant one of the lot, is expecting to be reunited with his wife, who is going to join him in Berlin. She's Russian as well, of course. She's going to join him in Berlin in a few days' time. And our protagonist learns by chance that his wife, Mary, is actually the same Mary with whom he had a prolonged love affair during his youth, which he broke off, which he is now regretting. And all throughout the novel, or the novella really, it has just 116 pages, I think, here in this Penguin edition. All throughout the novella, he reminisces about his love affair with her, which is connected, of course, and fraught with reminiscences and impressions of his life in pre-revolutionary Russia. And the protagonist is probably going to feel like the revolution, or maybe even already the war, put an end to this perfect life that he had in Russia. But you can already tell that the real problem lies within him, because there's this latent ennui and discontent with the current situation that he is in, which he has in him now, but you can already detect it in his reminiscences about his youth. So I guess the novel kind of already foreshadows the later Nabokov, for whom the unreliability of memories and narrators are such big aspects. The protagonist in here isn't actually the narrator. The narrator is omniscient and flits from character to character, actually. But still, it's kind of the same thing anyway. So for me, up to now, this feels like Diet Nabokov. But we'll see. I still have 20 pages left. There might be... Actually, I was thinking that there was going to be a certain revelation at the end which might put everything in a different light yet again. But even if there isn't such a drastic revelation at the end, there might still a plot twist or two be coming. So I'm of course going to reserve my final judgment for until after I have read this in its entirety. So that means I only have Gulliver's Travels left to read after this. I have a few days off, so I'll see what I can do. Perhaps I'll be able to read it over the weekend, or at least read enough to be able to form an opinion on it. Hello, it's Saturday now, the last day of February. We've had sunny weather for the last few days here, and it really feels like spring has sprung. I'll be off to the station in a minute to go on a little hike, but I wanted to check in before I leave, because I did indeed finish Mary last night. I'm afraid that story-wise, this petered out towards the end, although there were a few powerful sentiments expressed in the last few pages. Ultimately, this is about the impossibility of recreating the past or living in the past, even in memories, about its fleeting nature, about the insubstantial and unreliable nature of memories, and about the feeling of displacement, of feeling afloat that can come with that in certain circumstances. However, already in true Nabokov fashion, the protagonist isn't a poor, saintly victim of this situation, unless he is a victim of his own actions. Some of his anguish is absolutely of his own making. Not that he would realize that, though. It's absolutely not that this book is bad. And in fact, I mentioned in an earlier clip, I think, that this must have felt like a breath of fresh air, especially to other Russian expatriates at the time. However, for me nowadays, there is nothing remarkable to be found in this little book. In fact, I might have to pick up my next Nabokov right away to make up for this. It's not like it was a huge disappointment, absolutely speaking. It's just that with Nabokov, I've come to expect absolute remarkableness. And I didn't get that with this book whatsoever. It wasn't a waste of time, though. And now I'm going to take Gulliver's Travels with me while I myself am traveling, if you can call a half-hour train ride traveling. And we'll see how far I can get into it on this last day of February. If at all possible, I'd like to wrap up this little vlog because, as you might know if you've been here for quite some time, I'm not a huge TBR person, at least not a strict TBR person, and I'm getting a little tired of this project already. Okay, I'm back from my little trip, and I did indeed read the first part of Gulliver's Travels, which is the voyage to Lilliput. I don't think that this is going to be a book that I want to read in one go. It's not exactly an immersive reading experience, and for me, while it is amusing and an interesting document of its time, it's not exactly revelatory. And if on top of that, it's not a book that's an immersive reading experience, then I don't want to cozy up with it under my blankets over the weekend and spend all weekend reading this. I think this is going to be something that I'm going to dip in and out of over the course of a longer period of time. In fact, there is in the introduction, the author of the introduction, Claude Rawson, he makes a reference to Defoe and to Robinson Crusoe, and he says that Swift had the skills, though not like Defoe, the instincts of a novelist. He took care in Gulliver's Travels and elsewhere to disabuse gullible readers of any illusion that they were witnessing live rather than reading fiction. And yes, that's exactly what reading this feels like. Nevertheless, it did make me laugh a couple of times. There's one instance which I think is the most amusing one, in which the Emperor of Lilliput gets a letter, a formal letter with all the royal names and titles in the preface. And of course, it sounds ridiculous when you keep in mind that we are talking about a 7-inch tall guy. But then when you think a little bit further, it is also ridiculous that we used to, and in some cases still do, address human beings in this fashion, because after all, we are not that tall of a species either. And I mean that literally and metaphorically speaking. We have a nice term in German for this literary and rhetorical device where you put things in a different context and then it becomes immediately clear how ridiculous they really are. It's called Verfremdung, which means something like making something alien, which then enables you to see it in a different light. So this has been my favorite thing in Gulliver's Travels so far. You can't even call it a scene. My favorite thing are these 10 or so lines of the royal address in this formal letter. So I think I'm going to continue with this slowly over time and read bits of it here and there, but I won't go on reading this now. So this marks the end of my little project. And what do you know? The two youngest books of the stack turned out to be my favorite ones, Mary and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, with The Murder of Roger Ackroyd taking a very clear first spot. I didn't care for Memoirs of a Good for Nothing whatsoever. But even though I won't go on reading Gulliver's Travels immediately, I will definitely still pick it up at some later date. This is just a case of, it's not a bad book, it's just not the kind of book that I want to read right now. I feel like this year wasn't as successful as the project 2 years ago. I didn't really find a new favorite book, and I did 2 years ago with A Passage to India. While The Murder of Roger Ackroyd was super enjoyable, I can't really call it a new favorite book. However, who knows when I would have picked this up otherwise. I might not have picked it up for years yet, and that would have been a shame. I hope that even though I didn't find a new favorite book, this has been a little bit interesting at least, and I hope you found some reading inspiration in this. I'd see you again very soon, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.